I've always viewed politics as a strategy. Some they call it the game. It depends how you actually call it. Now, let's remember in 2017, Emerson Tambudzo Mnangagwa and Professor Jonathan Moyo, they were sworn enemies. Now, when did this start? The feud between Professor Jonathan Moyo as well as Emerson Tambudzo Mnangagwa. Remember, there is what is popularly known as the Cholocho Declaration. That is where the feud between Emerson Mnangagwa and Professor Jonathan Moyo started. Initially, they plotted to actually remove Robert Gabriel Mugabe. It was a sizable group within ZANU-PF, and they planned this in Cholocho through what is popularly known as the Cholocho Declaration. But Mnangagwa pops up and disturb things. I hope we'll be in a position to sort that. So I was saying the Cholocho Declaration. The purpose of the Cholocho Declaration was to dislodge Mugabe, but Mnangagwa sold out all individuals who were involved in that and managed to actually sort things between himself and Robert Gabriel Mugabe. While these individuals like Professor Jonathan Moyo found themselves out of ZANU-PF. Greetings and welcome to your lovely channel, the Hlonipani Global News. If you're watching us for the very first time, please do remember to press the red or black subscribe button so that next time when we beam live, you become the very first one to watch us. So on this live broadcast, I'll be actually chronicling how Professor Jonathan Moyo has successfully revenged against Emerson Tambudzo Mnangagwa, and is almost towards the end of achieving his goal to fully revenge to him. So I have started the story with how Cholocho Declaration actually resulted in a fallout between Mnangagwa as well as Professor Jonathan Moyo. Now, Professor Jonathan Moyo was fired from ZANU-PF. He contested as an independent candidate and of course remained in parliament and sustained himself. ZANU-PF lost elections dismally, that is in 2008, because it had no strategist, that is Professor Jonathan Moyo, as a student of political science. So to Professor Jonathan Moyo, it's all a game, everything that he is doing. And no matter how people may hate him, but at the end of the day, he always plays his game with the actually intention to win. Caption this: ZANU-PF loses elections. Robert Gabriel Mugabe realizes that it is because Professor Jonathan Moyo was not in the picture. I'm sure those around Robert Gabriel Mugabe advises him that way, and then he brings back Professor Jonathan Moyo. Professor Jonathan Moyo comes back to ZANU-PF. When Professor Jonathan Moyo comes back to ZANU-PF, he tries to be on the right side of Robert Gabriel Mugabe, and they formulated a faction within ZANU-PF which was called G40, and thus this time around Professor Jonathan Moyo managed to establish good relations with Robert Gabriel Mugabe, solid, including also the wife of Robert Gabriel Mugabe. And slowly he pushed Emerson Tambudzo Mnangagwa away from being trusted by Robert Gabriel Mugabe. So Professor Jonathan Moyo begins to launch an onslaught on social media. At one time, Robert Gabriel Mugabe seemingly actually lashing out at Professor Jonathan Moyo, but Professor Jonathan Moyo continued, and at the same time trying to mend his relationship with Robert Gabriel Mugabe. I understand that one of the Politburo meetings, Professor Jonathan Moyo made a presentation to demonstrate how Mnangagwa had captured the state and what was the ulterior end goal of Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, that is to take power from Robert Gabriel Mugabe. It appears those presentations in Politburo convinced Robert Gabriel Mugabe, but he might have acted late against Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, and the edge was taking toll on him. Now, caption this, in 2017, towards November, must be in October, Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa is fired after dramatic events that unfolded at White City Stadium in Bulawayo. He is fired and he runs for his dear life. Momentarily, Professor Jonathan Moyo had warned, his goal was to come back and avenge himself against Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. But Mnangagwa, realizing that politically within ZANU-PF structures he was defeated, he tried to... So they saw him as a better leader. Now, fast forward. After weeks, the military intervention began Operation Restore Legacy. It was targeting specifically Jonathan Moyo, including individuals such as Xavier Kasukwere and others who have now become formulated a circle of G40 members. So Jonathan Moyo's victory was actually did not last for a long period of time. He ran for his dear life to South Africa and eventually to Kenya, where he is now. Professor Jonathan Moyo attempted to join, in fact supported the opposition with the view that Nelson Chamisa was going to defeat Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, and the rigging was going to be averted. Now, Nelson Chamisa, the results of, although he won, but he was actually rigged. There was another coup. The military stepped in for Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, and they told him serve just for 5 years. Now, Professor Jonathan Moyo had a strategy also for the opposition to try and defeat, to help him in terms of actually training people, members of the opposition who were going to actually man the elections. We're going to be election to observe the elections on behalf of the Citizens Coalition for Change. Nelson Chamisa did not trust Professor Jonathan Moyo, and Professor Jonathan Moyo, realizing that the strategy that he had to defeat Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa was not yielding results, Nelson Chamisa closed a way for him to be actually to contribute to the opposition, so that they can possibly defeat Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. Nelson Chamisa refuted to allow Professor Jonathan Moyo to train opposition leaders who are going to observe the elections. And from that, realizing that Nelson Chamisa did not afford him an opportunity to revenge against Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, it was also, in my view, not tactful for Nelson Chamisa to allow him to actually train the observers. So fast forward, quickly moving forward, what transpired is that Professor Jonathan Moyo apologizes to ZANU-PF, and I think behind the scenes he began to establish channels of communication with Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. Now, the intention is still to revenge against Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. We understand the weakness of Mnangagwa, that he is power hungry. He would not love to hand over political power to retired General Chiwenga, and most probably understood the strength of retired General Chiwenga, that he still has connections within the Zimbabwe Defense Forces. So he wanted to set them against each other. Now, what does it do? He writes a breaking barriers document, proposes it to Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa that no, there is a shortcut to actually extend your term of office. Most probably, Mnangagwa was looking forward to go through a referendum and follow the constitution, but he says there is a shortcut. You can actually do it without necessarily going through a referendum, and convinced him, sold him a lie. Professor Jonathan Moyo has that ability and the capability to sell you a lie until you buy it. So desperate to remain in power and to remain politically relevant, Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa brought this idea. He did not actually bought this idea, but he also actually paid for this idea. Now, fast forward, again, in order to achieve this, now there were elections. Mnangagwa was supposed to get 2/3 majority in parliament, rig and get 2/3 in parliament and in Senate in order for this dream to be achieved. Now, this dream was not achieved. Nelson Chamisa stopped that. He won too big to such an extent that it became difficult for ZANU-PF to rig elections to get 2/3 majority in parliament. Realizing that, Professor Jonathan Moyo advised Mnangagwa to resuscitate Sengezo Tshabangu, realizing that there may have been individuals who were not in agreement with Nelson Chamisa in his CCC. Sengezo Tshabangu is brought in, and the sole purpose of Sengezo Tshabangu is actually to get Mnangagwa a 2/3 majority, both in parliament and in Senate. By hook or crook, he successfully does so. Now, in the broader picture, Professor Jonathan Moyo might have understood that the moment Mnangagwa actually does that, he will create a problem between him and the deep state. The deep state, what is it? War veterans as well as also military generals. So at the moment we are where the plot has been has succeeded, and Mnangagwa finds himself in trouble with retired General Chiwenga. What does this simply mean? Mnangagwa will try to push this. Retired General Chiwenga and war veterans would not allow such a scenario. So in simple terms, Professor Jonathan Moyo is still looking somewhere in a certain corner in Kenya to see whether his political strategy is going to be successful. Now, when Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa eventually is actually removed from power, he would have successfully revenged. Mnangagwa would have created an enmity between him and Chiwenga as it is at the moment, as well as war veterans. There is high probability that his sons would be in prison. Same applies to his wife and everyone who is actually surrounding Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. To me, what Professor Jonathan Moyo has proposed to the Galip Mnangagwa is to have a fallout with the deep state so that he falls this time around for good. And guess what? When that happens, Professor Jonathan Moyo will be clapping somewhere in a corner in Kenya, and he would have achieved the mission. Will he fall to the trap of Mnangagwa to invite him back to Zimbabwe? I think if you follow historically the tweets that Professor Jonathan Moyo posted about Mnangagwa, he understands that Mnangagwa is not a forgiving man. He understands that pretty well. So he will remain in Kenya, surviving with $1.5 million that Mnangagwa paid to him willingly. Thank you very much for watching us. If you're watching us for the very first time, please do remember to press the red or black subscribe button so that next time when we beam live, you become the very first one to watch us. You can financially support this channel by pressing the join button and be part of our members who are the heartbeat of this channel. You can equally do so by pressing the thanks